We are live. It's a Friday afternoon here in Europe and a Friday morning in the United States. Happy Friday, and yet another week in this wonderful 2020. And I'm absolutely delighted to get Brian Humphries with us today, the CEO of Cognizant, who's been there for a little while now at the helm. And so welcome, Brian. Happy Friday to you.
You too, Phil. Nice to be with you.
Excellent. So we're starting a new thing at HFS. It's called Leadership Live, where we're getting leaders in our industry available for fairly informal, direct and punchy conversation, particularly on a Friday, because we know it's been long weeks and we'd like to hear some straight talk about what's happening in the industry. So who better than the CEO of Cognizant, which has been one of the more dynamic firms, I think we'd all agree, in the last 18, 24 months in its industry, and to hear a bit from Brian about what he's brought to the company, some about his experiences, and you know, where this is all heading. But Brian, maybe you want to start by just giving folks here and you know, across the world listening a little bit about yourself and sort of where you came from and how you ended up running a business like Cognizant in the IT services industry.
Yeah, happy to. Look, my original role started actually in Digital Equipment Corporation, which was subsequently acquired by Compaq, and Compaq was later acquired by Hewlett-Packard. So for the first 18 years of my career, I actually spent in one company, albeit in probably 5 or 6 international roles across the globe. Subsequently ended up in Dell as a president of the B2B sales team, enterprise division, and then actually in Vodafone as the CEO of the B2B business in Vodafone, which was more or less the same size of Cognizant, albeit a very different role, as you can imagine. So I actually ended up in Cognizant somewhat by chance. Headhunter, classic outreach. I knew the company well. I'd lived in the US a long time and had seen Cognizant over the years, which was essentially a Wall Street darling, outgrown the industry because of the secret sauce of their business model. But then I'd actually seen it lose its way a little bit. So I was very intrigued to see if I got the opportunity, if I could get back on track. And here I am.
Right. So I guess you weren't fully prepared for what was in store for you there, right? I mean, you've been through obviously the pandemic, but also you had a ransomware attack that got quite a lot of eyeballs on it earlier this year as well. Can you just take us through a bit about what that was actually like at the time, and maybe how you're feeling now as you reflect on how you got through that experience?
Yeah, look, I mean, this was the classic, you have your 100-day plan and you join a company, and then literally the first morning, 7 a.m., my CFO told me we massively missed the first quarter, which had closed on the Friday prior to me joining. So we were literally, I was on the back foot immediately, and that 100-day plan was out the window. So it's back to the classic Turner phrase, out of chaos comes chaos, or out of chaos comes opportunity. And I chose opportunity. And so we really used this as best we could as a rallying call for the organization, because 4 weeks into my tenure, we announced the quarter that I had inherited. The stock was down 20%. We had 10 downgrades, which was almost a record for a NASDAQ listed stock. And the employees were as shocked, frankly, as the external world. So, you know, from a leadership point of view, it's a time to act and it's a time to lead from the front. I created a transformation office, which consisted of many things. Strategically, what are we trying to do? Where are we commercially? How do we upgrade ourselves and make sure we're much more relevant to clients? Where are we from a delivery point of view? But there was also a lot in there, to be honest, Phil, about culture and structure, and really trying to get back to our roots. So I've got to be honest, you know, we're, I would say 18 months into a 3-4 year project as far as I can see it, but I owe a lot to the associates of Cognizant around the world. Perhaps some of them are watching this at this moment in time, but it's really been thanks to their professionalism and perseverance, and in many ways, selfishness, that we've been able to fare quite well to date. We're gaining steam. You know, in a knowledge-based company, employee engagement is critical. So we're at multi-year highs. Attrition's down 5 quarters in a row. Bookings year to date are up 15%. Last quarter, we outgrew most of the named competitors that I would view as integrated competitors. And, you know, we're starting to have the capacity to invest back in the business and once again regain the confidence of Wall Street. But it's been a ride, and it's been a testing moment for us culturally, and indeed for me as a leader. And I can go through those if you so wish.
Yeah, I mean, but you joined a company which had been on a roller coaster boom growth from 99 to 2017, 18 to 17 billion, and until I think about 2016, that growth was unparalleled in the industry, and then things obviously started to tail off a bit, and you came in to change things up, give some new culture to the business. But then, you're a year in, and then not only do you have a pandemic, but then you get a ransomware attack at a time where people are nervous and oversensitive as it is. I mean, all I hear is like how great it was, and we were so resilient, and lots of lovely motherhood and apple pie. But let's get to the brutal truth. How brutal was that period from March to kind of April, May time when you went through that? I mean, how did you find a place where you could move forward, and who did you feel were the biggest helpers to you in getting past that period to now a period of growth where you're one of the high performing providers in the industry?
Look, it probably, Phil, was the most testing period in my career because it was still relatively early in my tenure. Fortunately, we had spotted what was happening elsewhere in Asia, in China, and indeed in the Philippines. And so we triggered in early March a business continuity plan. But as a services company, as you well know, you have a demand side, which really started impacting the world and the industry in April and May, per se, or the latter part of March. But from a fulfillment side or delivery capability side, that kicked in March. And so, we had a desktop-based environment, and suddenly you're forced with a decision to send employees home. So you're calling Michael Dell or the CEO of other OEM companies saying, look, I need 100,000 laptops, please, ASAP. So it was testing because just as we were working through that period of getting employees to work from home, and you're a CEO, you don't just think about the economics here, you're also thinking about the health and safety and well-being of your 300,000 employees around the world. So we went through a period for, I would say, 3 months where it was 7 days a week working around the clock. As we were getting comfortable that we got through the stress of enabling work from home, we actually closed the quarter very well. We were in a position to pre-announce that we had made the quarter, which was somewhat remarkable. And again, thanks to our associates. Then ransomware struck us. And not only was it hurtful for the brand, but actually some of the workarounds we put in place around virtual desktops, et cetera, collapsed because our environment had been encrypted by a bad actor. So that was unreal. I mean, that's something that you would read almost like a page turner. But in that, we as a leadership team were very clear that we were going to handle this with an eye on client centricity. That has been our culture over the years. And so we actually had 3 client calls throughout that 2 or 3 week period, talking about where we were, the indicators of compromise, and speaking much more, I would say, in CISO speak. We weren't inviting industry analysts or Wall Street analysts. We weren't inviting the media. These were conversations. And I would say there's a great deal of empathy amongst the CISO community because we know in a world of cryptocurrency, cyber threats are actually increasing and nobody is truly impermeable to these things. So it was certainly one of the most testing times in my life because, in a period where you have falling demand and some degree of uncertainty, does revenue fall 5, 10, 15%? Then you have this externality and exogenous event that comes in called the ransomware. You're dealing with a bad actor. You're dealing with cryptocurrency considerations. And in the same vein, you're simply trying to maintain confidence of clients. In a strange way, we actually came out from that as best as, frankly, most people have, according to the partners we've used. They're now using us as a best-in-class example in terms of how to deal with this. But nonetheless, it's not something I'd wish on anybody else. And candidly, when I see people being impacted by this these days, I actually call my fellow CEOs, wish them the best of luck, and offer up any playbook that we're willing, that we could share with them if they choose to listen to us. But testing, it was all about calmness, I would say, Phil, was really important. Structured thinking. In a period when you have some clients disconnecting you, you got to keep your bench, you got to keep your people there when you can get reconnected back. In a period where you did not have 100% capacity in the early days and weeks around laptop availability, which clients are most important, which projects are most important, which people on those projects are most important. And so it took a great deal of analytical rigor, structured thinking, prioritization, and constant communication. I mean, we were calling 200-300 clients a day at the height of ransomware to reassure them as to where we were and share whatever information we could.
Wow. So this all happened as you'd gone through a fairly rigorous change period where you were bringing in some new leadership talent, some were exiting the firm, and this seemed to all coincide with these other things happening to the firm. And now coming through the other side as you went through that change, how has that changed your culture when you look back to maybe what things were like at the end of last year compared to now, and bringing in so many new faces into the company? Do you feel like your culture is being re-energized, changed? In what way do you feel things are different?
Well, what was important to me, to be very honest, was to try to tap into the culture, because we have a winning growth culture. That has been the business model of Cognizant. You rightly pointed it out. The secret sauce was delivery excellence, investing in our clients, putting smart people on accounts, leaving them there longer, providing continuity of service at a cost. And while our margins were 5 or 8 points lower than many of our peers, we were growing 1.5, 2 times the industry, and that model worked. And so this is a growth culture, and the shock of Q1 2019 set people back. So as much, Phil, to be honest, as I tried to talk up a transformation agenda and a series of things we needed to change, we also put a great deal of emphasis on what didn't need to change and the values that we maintained. And so really, as we were having to reduce costs, we were actually simultaneously trying to differentiate between a cost and an investment. You know, perhaps one of the first things I did is trigger the hiring of 500 commercial folks to restart the growth engine, because my supposition was this company's swagger and belief is built on growth. We had lost pipeline and backlog in prior quarters. And so I had to rebuild the backlog, the pipeline, the bookings, the backlog, and get the company back. And really, it took a few quarters to make that happen. But you've seen this year, we've now had 3 quarters in a row of stellar bookings growth. The key thing I think that I really feel good about in that period was the hearts and minds of employees, because we are a knowledge-based business. We've just completed a survey about 2 months ago of our entire population globally. Our engagement levels are actually at multi-year highs and well above industry norm. And on top of that, you've probably seen Forbes have just announced it's number 19 in the world at 750 employers across 45 countries. So I'm very pleased with that. But perhaps the single thing that drove that was an extreme emphasis on over-communication and contextualization, which wasn't something we had prioritized, I would say, in the past. And then secondarily, we created what we call the Cognizant agenda, which was a lot about, who we are, why do we exist, what are we striving to achieve, what's our purpose, what's our vision, what are the bold moves we need to make, and what are the values. And if you get aligned behind a set of values where we want to start with a point of view, we want to seek data but build knowledge, we always want to strive and never settle, we want to work as one, we always want to have conditions where everyone can thrive, and we always want to do the right thing the right way. It gets people motivated around a purpose that we engineer modern businesses to improve everyday life. So while we are a B2B company, the work we do for some of the biggest corporations in the world impacts billions of people around the world. So I really try to tap into the notion that not everybody's motivated by getting back to double-digit growth. It's not always shareholder returns that motivate your employee base, particularly in a multi-generational global employee base. So tapping into why we exist and how we work and how we can help society at large, I think really pay dividends for us.
Wow. Because you're not structured in, obviously, the heart of the company came out of India, and but then Cognizant obviously moved its leadership team, evolved it in the US several years ago, and I've heard you talk a lot about the board and how supportive they are of you and the acquisitions you're making and getting you through this time. And how's that changed, do you think, your competitive position as you look forward and you look at what you need to sort of grow the firm?
Look, it's an interesting question, because when you have to move at pace, you obviously have a great deal of, I would say, board interaction and management of the board, stakeholder management. But I was always of the opinion that for every CEO that feels in retrospect they move too fast, 9 feel they move too slowly. And so it was important for me to gain the confidence of the board. Ideally, all the things I had to do, I could have serialized and say, well, let's do 2 this year, 2 next year, and 2 the year after. But Phil, you and I both know the world is moving at unprecedented speeds. And I felt we were already behind. A practical example, 2 years ago, we were viewed as a niche player in cloud. And I'm firmly of the belief that, this should not have snuck up on us per se. So I worked very clearly with the board, and the first thing to do, in my opinion, was to clarify our strategy. And that led to us exiting a business that frankly was a healthy business financially, $250 million growing at a 30% CAGR. That was a courageous decision, probably one of the harder decisions I had to make as a new CEO, because as we were desperate to regain growth and regain the swagger and employee morale, here we were exiting something that was one of the big growth drivers, ironically, in recent years. But when you get caught up on something that's not strategic, it stops you fixing the real things you have to fix. So I work with the board to clarify in the first 6 months, strategically, where are we? What does our portfolio look like? What elements are core? Where are we behind? Where do we need to double down? And on the back of that, then, M&A becomes a means to an end. So we decided rapidly to double down in the area of cloud, digital engineering, IoT, and AI and analytics. And I wanted to move rapidly on cloud. Why? Well, frankly, I felt there was a bit of a land grab going on with the hyperscale companies. And if you were not on their radar, you were never going to potentially catch up. So we agreed with Microsoft and Satya. We wanted to stand up a Microsoft Business Group, which we have done since. We acquired New Signature. We acquired 10th Magnitude. In fact, now we're one of the biggest drivers of Azure consumed revenue for Microsoft, notwithstanding something like an Avanade relationship that's been around for 2 decades, but that played more in Office 365, the Dynamics suite. We decided with AWS, we wanted to stand up an AWS business group. Again, we stood it up probably 6-9 months ago at this stage. We doubled our headcount organically in both of those. We acquired 3 Salesforce Platinum partners. We did not have a Workday practice. We acquired Collaborative Solutions, and Carl Ross, the CEO over there, is now leading that practice for us organically. And so we made some very significant bets on a set of SaaS partners and hyperscale companies that we really wanted to show up differently with. And perhaps, it's easy to say in retrospect, I think, Phil, it was the right bet. I think COVID has actually accelerated naturally the shift to cloud. We were behind, and instead of being a niche player 2 years ago, last year we moved to challenger, and now we're viewed as a leader. But more importantly to me, clients view us as a leader. And indeed, what I'm finding now is those alliance partners that maybe previously felt we weren't showing up as aggressively as we could have, now view a new face to Cognizant, where we're all about strategically aligning with them, trying to figure out what to do together, and making sure country by country, the last mile is executed. Because these discussions never really happen well or close well until the salesperson from company A and company B meet, understand asymmetrical opportunities. We pull you in, you pull us in, let's do some joint account planning, let's show up to the customer together. And so I really feel as though the board have enabled me to move rapidly. And that's perhaps an advantage I have, as you have written about, by the way, in your reports, vis-a-vis certain Indian pure play companies where perhaps there are different dynamics at play.
Yeah, as we pivot into the cloud, it changes the dynamic between the types of technology that is being acquired. And we've been hearing this directly from clients where you're buying, especially public cloud offerings from various companies. Contracts are standardized. The ways of working is much more common across company lines and policy lines. So it's changing the role of IT to the point where they have to get close to the business to understand how to tailor what they want to more standardized services that are being moved on to. Now you've made a quick move into the cloud. You're as you said, you're up and fighting with the top tier. How is that impacting how you deliver at a global level? Like, I think in the past, our industry was obsessed with location delivery, proximity to the client, all these types of things. I'm not so sure that's as important now as outcomes. Are clients getting what they need? Are the outcomes what they want? Is this secure? Does this work in a way that they can be a virtual organization and make that pivot more quickly. How's that changing, not just obviously your acquisition strategy, but the people you have and the training and the move to this digital fluency that we're seeing?
Yeah. Well, it looks like you've been reading my board material, Phil, to be honest, because it's very much core to how I've positioned the company. We have a number of things we're doing. We want to reposition the brand. Why? Because we're not an Indian brand, a US brand. We're not a global brand. We're not a digital brand. You'll see us launch some pretty exciting stuff there in the coming months. We have a big initiative to accelerate internationally, which is not what I would call globalizing Cognizant, which is not just about revenue mix. Today, we're 75% North America. So I'm very excited about some of the hires we've made in Japan and Australia, New Zealand, in the Nordics, in Germany, because I think we're now going to get pretty serious about scaling those businesses. But it's also about globalizing Cognizant is about the people we have, the talent we have, tapping into centers around the world. And so a global delivery network is very much part of that. Clients are asking for also many things, agility, security, et cetera, but also business continuity. And having a global delivery network where we complement India with talent hubs in Eastern Europe, in North America, in Canada, in Central America, where truly we have digital studios as needed, but we also have more classic India-like models where you can fill the pyramid from the bottom and scale up throughout the world. That provides us a great deal of modularity. So I'm excited about what we can do in that regard as we globalize the company. At the end of the day, though, repositioning the brand is one thing, globalizing the company is another thing, and accelerating digital, by the way, is a third lever. The thing we have to continue doing in the years ahead is becoming, if you will, more relevant to clients. One of the great cultural attributes of Cognizant historically has been our delivery excellence and our humility of engagement. And in many ways, clients love us for that. But what we need to make sure is that our humility doesn't stop us having a point of view. And let's take packaged applications or cloud as an example. If you go further upstream and follow the breadcrumbs further up to the decision makers, being able to lead with technology consulting in those arenas have a very strong pull through to the implementation of that. So that goes back to the core. What portfolio do we have? Okay, we know we have great cloud capabilities now. We've built out strong DevSecOps capabilities with the likes of New Signature, with Coutinho, et cetera. Do we have client-facing teams who have the gravitas and the wherewithal and the confidence to not wait for the CIO or CTO say, I need X bodies, and actually where we would have perhaps played a role of staff augmentation, leveraging an offshore labor arbitrage model with some onshore capabilities, to much more digital transformation project type work, where you're actually complementing offshore with a lot more teams on the ground, and we're actually helping formulate the strategy of clients, and that will naturally pull through the rest of the portfolio. Now, in a strange way, COVID is actually adding another layer of complexity on that, because the classic AO or IO work would have been complemented, sell onshore, deliver offshore. Then we moved to agile development and agile work. You had much more stand-ups and sprints and waves and communities and guilds. But actually with COVID, I'm actually seeing a lot of C-suite ultimately say, technology is great. It's better than we expected. We're more productive than we expected. Actually, in the future, we don't think we're going to go back to the state we were in the past. So I'm probably going to shut down 30% of my real estate, Brian. By the way, you guys used to be on floor 17, not needed anymore, which affords us the opportunity for us to potentially take those employees. Obviously, automation is very much part of our agenda, but if we can do more nearshore or potentially offshore and create this notion of distributed agile, it gives us tremendous opportunity as well to add value, but in a different business model.
Interesting. So, we talk about the new dawn a lot at HFS, where the fog will lift eventually on. I mean, we're in a transition economy right now. There's a lot of pivoting going on, and I think let's look out 6-8 months ahead, where a lot of that pivoting will be done for a lot of the business, a lot of the global 2000. The fog's going to lift. Touch wood, the economy will start to look a bit more forward-looking in terms of positivity and direction. And we are in a recession, but hopefully we'll be coming out of that, and there'll be a lot of relief and more certainty next year. So this fog will lift. We're in this new dawn. A lot of your clients have pivoted. what's going to happen next? I mean, what do you think a company like Cognizant is going to do when you've got a slightly much more cloud-based virtualized model? Obviously, things we don't think are going to go back exactly where they were. But what is the planning like as you look this far ahead and think, what are you going to be like as a company? What is the types of skill sets you're looking for going to shift, that sort of thing? I mean, just give us a flavor for what you think is going to happen then.
Well, first of all, we are living in the so-called proverbial interesting times. And I just go back to probably, when was this, January or February, Davos. And we had this echo chamber of people speaking about globalization versus nationalism, or the rise of China, or stakeholder management versus shareholders, diversity, inclusion, cybersecurity, environment. And lo and behold, a few weeks later, we were seeing a massive explosion of a global pandemic that, had you read The Economist in December, you probably would have seen this notional thing happening the other side of the world, but little did we know. I think at the end of the day, Phil, what's been pleasing for me is clients are getting on with life. The enemy of a company like mine is indecision. But actually, after a stall in the month of March/April, we've seen somewhat of a V-shaped recovery. And as I said, our bookings have been strong throughout the year. What does the world look like going forward? I actually think we're seeing a number of trends change, some reverse, and some frankly be accelerated. So, by the way, all of this is happening in a world also of racial justice, and the George Floyd event has triggered a whole bunch of other things as well. In terms of, what I view to be happening, people have actually returned somewhat to a family existence. There's all these local communities, and a fundamental question about the future of work, in the office, remote, the future of education, the future of healthcare. Things like e-health are being facilitated not just by 5G coming, but also, people frankly realizing that elective procedures are probably being postponed, etc. But I actually think digital is accelerating massively. And whether that's cloud adoption, data modernization, or in a world where so much more is happening online, hyper-personalization is becoming more important than ever before. So, the future will be what the future is. I would hate to be in commercial real estate at this moment in time. I have a great deal of empathy for CEOs of hotels or airline companies. But I actually think from a IT services point of view, I believe in the power of software. I actually believe software companies enjoy their multiple that Wall Street gives them. They do not want to have 300,000 or 500,000 people running around beside them. So there's a great play here for services companies. This is an enormous industry. It's growing. It's a cottage industry. So regardless of the growth of the industry, if you can excel, you can share gain. And I think, frankly, companies like Cognizant have a bright future, and I'm optimistic about that. Now, in the meantime, I actually think we have a bit of a chasm still to cross, notwithstanding the good news in the last 2 weeks about vaccines. At the end of the day, I think we're still into a first half 2021 where there's still some degree of uncertainty. So we all will stay worried about our employees' health and safety and still try to make sure that we can differentiate and distinguish ourselves.
Yeah, quite. And you bring up a good point around Black Lives Matter and values and some of the emotional things that we've had to deal with this year. As we do look beyond this and the values that we all share, how do you think these are going to come to the forefront as we look at what's happening with automation and AI and the developments there? I mean, there's such a people component to what we do and how we deliver. I mean, I personally think this unleashes people. This gives people an excellent opportunity to use technology to be smarter and get themselves at the core of the business, where the strategies around data and creating data that's going to help your company make the best decisions possible. But in terms of values and inclusion and making sure we get this right, because I and many other people look at what happened, and I realize myself, I endemically don't think enough about racial equality. When I hire people, I just want to hire the best. Mm-hmm. I don't go and ring up LinkedIn or whoever I'm using as my agency to say, make sure we have full inclusion of all types of races and LGBT people in these applications. And I do more now because I've been made aware of it. But how do you think this is going to evolve next year and beyond? Do you think this was a passing fad, or do you think this is something that's now permanent to how we're going to change our thinking?
I think it's more permanent, Phil. And by the way, I think companies, also to vendors like Cognizant, are speaking much more openly about it, about their expectations for us to show up as a global company, to show up more representative of society. And this is important for me as a CEO of a large population, of which 180,000 are based in India, to talk about the employee value proposition, because historically it was very clear: you join Cognizant, high growth company, we'll get you across into Europe or North America, we'll sponsor you for green cards. And so there was a very clear value proposition for India-based employees. But we found ourselves in situations where we didn't always in Western Europe have cultural norms understood. We didn't always speak the local language. In North America, we were visa dependent, etc. And I think George Floyd and such like is now forcing this issue to the front, as is regulatory changes, by the way, in the United States. I actually feel that talent is universally distributed. It's not as easy in some cases for people to accept that, and there's muscle memory where you go with the flow, and it's very easy, Phil. Frankly, I've done exactly what you've done over the years, to say, look, get me the best person. But I think we all have an obligation to society and to some of the underserved classes, if you will, to make an effort. So as an example, we in Cognizant, the board chairman included, have made a very distinctive decision we are going to change the profile of Cognizant. We are going to globalize Cognizant. Now, the chairman of the board has already added a significantly more diverse board to Cognizant in the last year itself. Almost half of our board now are diverse across gender, race, or ethnicity. As a company, we have 100,000 female executives or female associates in Cognizant. But to be very honest, a lot of that is at the lower levels of the pyramid. And that's not acceptable. So the headline ticker of 100,000 is great, but you pull the covers back and then you say, look, this isn't where we need it to be. In a strange way, COVID and work from home can actually help retain people in the workforce longer. So hopefully we can get people further through. But actually, I've gone as far with my executive committee to implement the Rooney Rule across Cognizant. And that's being driven now. It's going to drive diversity candidates into every hiring process down multiple levels from the CEO, to make sure that every slate of candidates needs to have diverse candidates within it. We are also rolling out in the coming year diversity targets for the executive committee and their operating groups below them. And of course, we're continuing to try to add much more, what I would say, EC member sponsorship and what we call ERG groups. We've added 2 actually new in the last few months, Pan-Asian ERG and disability person ERG as well. So we have a lot of work to do as a company. I brought in Becky as my new Chief People Officer. We just promoted Shamika into be a Chief Diversity and Inclusion Leader. We actually have a new head of Global Growth Markets, which is on non-North America leader. Ursula will join us in about a month from now as well. So I'm trying to also start by leading by example at the top of the company with diversity, not just in terms of male, female, but diversity around sexual orientation and candidly diversity of nationality as well, Phil, and background.
Interesting. Right. So I've got a lot of questions coming in from the audience. By the way, we've got a few minutes here. If people want to type them in on your little Zoom panels, you can see the Q&A piece. I'm sure you're all familiar with that by now. There's a few questions around, how are you going to differentiate yourselves to win and all that sort of stuff next year. So we're finally seeing TCS, as an example, come out and actually buy some market share. I haven't seen them do this ever. They acquired, I think, Deutsche Bank's IT and another business in another industry. But and so that tells you that there's a war going on for talent and companies really jostling at this point. So and then we see IBM splitting out their cloud from their traditional services business. You've seen Accenture go through a reorg into geographies and then make a big pivot around cloud from digital from them. And then Wipro just did some reorg in a similar vein to Accenture. It looks like we haven't seen how that's fully shaking out, but everyone is rejigging how they're structured, how they're going to market. I know you don't want to share all your secret sauce, but how do you really want to have Cognizant differentiate itself in 2021 in terms of why you guys versus someone else in the space?
So first of all, a lot of our industry is around talent and the people you have, and not just the number and location, but frankly, the quality of those people when they are client-centric and whether they add enough value to the conversation. I have had a number of client meetings this morning by video. And in one case, the gentleman concerned, a Dutch customer, was saying, listen, we are now ready to accelerate vendor consolidation and we'd like to work with you. And very much openly acknowledging, look, we will help you shape your future almost in an open book environment, such as your credibility. Look, to be honest, Phil, there are different things happening in the industry, just as you cited. I will say I'm not as excited about some of these captive takeovers or structured deals as others. We've reviewed some of them and we'll do some if it makes sense. But very often with these books of business you're acquiring, you end up with T's and C's around employees. You have to keep an employee for 5 years or an employee for life. That's not that appealing for me. Or you buy a book of business that could give you an apples to orange compare of high growth for 1 year because you get 100 million versus zero. Maybe the next year you get another apples to orange compare because you get 12 months annualized rather than maybe 6 or 9 in the first year. But candidly, once you get past those first 2 years, you're buying a book of business that invariably is flat or declining. Typically, margins are tight in those environments, and it's very often associated with what I would call the legacy type services. And I would distinguish that from our M&A strategy that you've seen us execute in the last year, where we have been buying into higher growth, 25% plus CAGR type companies that are accretive to our overall company growth aspiration. So the first thing I'll say is, companies are making choice points in terms of the bets that they are making and how they deploy their capital. And we're being quite thoughtful about that, to be very honest. The second thing, talent is really important. And we are absolutely fixated on making sure we get the best talent developed, retained, motivated, trained, and Cognizant and deployed on accounts and get the company back in a growth trajectory, because growth in some regards is a panacea for many things. Look, strategically, I think we've got an amazing opportunity. We got an amazing opportunity to move further up the value chain with clients by actually doubling down on industries and sub-industries. While I believe nobody speaks European or Asian, so I still believe in a country model, at the end of the day, banking is not a category. Banking is an industry with sub-industries: asset management, wealth management, payments, retail, commercial banking. So really understanding, as an example, below those elements, the pain points. Some of them can be industry unique or specific. Some can be horizontal, data modernization being a very classic example of that, or cloud migration. And so what we are fixated on is showing up against those major trends in the industry and the pain points and making sure that we have a compelling set of solutions to address those, sourced in conjunction with our partners. And so this notion of partnership ecosystem is really important to me. We will not do everything for everybody. We will come to market and do joint customer calls with some of the hyperscale players or otherwise, building into platform companies with open APIs and really standing up some compelling offerings. So that's frankly what we're focused on. We'll do that with delivery excellence. We'll do that with more of a global delivery organization. We'll do that with client teams that are hopefully better trained than ever before, more sophisticated than ever before. And if we do that, and if we take advantage of the international expansion opportunity that we have, I personally think we're going to show up very well in the years ahead. I also have a strong supposition, if you listen to earnings call most recently, that the world is moving into phase 3 of digital. Now, the word digital may disappear from our vernacular, but the point is what the point is. In the early stage, people were talking about an inflection point, which could be a threat or an opportunity. Those were board level conversations. That gave rise to a phase approach in the last, let's say, 8 years, where people were spending a lot of money at the infrastructure layer, the application layer, the data layer. COVID has actually exposed us a lot. It's almost like the wave going out before a tsunami. You actually see what's really going on. And I've been amazed at some of the C-suite conversations I've had where people have acknowledged openly, look, we actually thought we had a good e-commerce capability. It cannot scale. It's people intensive, believe it or not. Or to change something, it's not dynamic. It takes a day for some price to replicate. Or our data, is it Phil Fersht? Is it Phil.J first? Is it B Humphries? the data hasn't been architected or engineered in a manner where it can truly be leveraged for intelligent decision making. So I think that's where we are now. And as you realize, then digital was more focused on elements of the tech stack, not on a use case or a workflow. And where we're really pointing our guns is around those industry specific use cases. And some actually will be horizontal use cases or workflows like quote to cash, where we want to stake a claim and say, look, we are going to be famous for these things. And in that regard, what has been called digital will need to permeate the entire process to truly make it scalable, secure, and frankly, elastic. And that has been somewhat missing, I would argue, to date.
Right. Okay. I've got a few questions here around leadership. And obviously you've been bringing in some talent. You've mentioned a few names already. But what do you look for when you're hiring new leaders? What types of qualities, and have those maybe changed a little since COVID in terms of what you're looking for in your leadership that you're bringing into the firm, or maybe promoting from within in the firm?
Yeah, look, we've done quite a lot of promotion from within, but I've also frankly turned outside more often than ideally I would have liked. But that's been somewhat reflective on the fact we didn't have enough sophistication around talent management in the past, not just in terms of identifying who's who, but rounding those people out to be ready to step up into the bigger roles. And so we're spending a lot of time on that at this moment in time, such that in the years ahead, we'll actually have a little bit more internal promotions. But in the same vein, I stand by the premise that you actually need to infuse new blood into your organization, because through that, you will actually get a better lens into what other companies are doing, different cultures. There's a risk if you just keep one monoculture that you become somewhat incestuous. You actually think what we do is what good looks like by definition. But you don't know what good looks like if you've only grown up in one company. So I actually like the idea of bringing other people in. Listen, the first thing for me is to bring in quality leaders, but quality leaders does not necessarily mean, Phil, I know you're a football supporter, the Real Madrid Galactico situation where you just bring in really expensive people in individual positions that collectively don't work out in some cases. Some cases they do. I'd rather bring in a team of excellent people that I know that can work in unison and help me drive the company forward, that wake up every day with a thirst for knowledge, a thirst for excellence, a thirst for client centricity, that want a team, that align to the values we have, and that frankly, I think will help us set this company apart in the years ahead. Global citizenship is something that's important for me. I don't believe in hub models. To be honest, we have my executive team centered from California through to Singapore, through to India. But we need people who understand the importance of winning and being competitive, understand the importance of starting on the outside. That's where the clients are. That's where the competition is. Understand the importance of contextualization and communication, and frankly, can have thought leadership. So as an example, you can only get by so far if you used to show up to a customer and say, listen, hey, I'm the new guy. Nice to meet you. You're really important to us. Okay, great first conversation. Second conversation, third conversation, you better be able to get deeper and deeper and deeper into the domain that is relevant to them. You better show up understanding the vernacular, the industry secular trends, the pain points that they are dealing with. So it's important for me to actually have subject matter expertise as well. I think that's really important, by the way, in a world of transformation project-based work and the so-called digital work. Classically, application outsourcing or infra outsourcing, to a certain extent, there was a lot of back-end work done. But when we're showing up to a client now, the sponsor of some of these projects, it's not the CIO or the CTO, it's the chief marketing officer, it's the HR leader, the chief people officer, it's the CEO. In some cases, it's the board of directors. So being able to talk to a HR officer around the challenges of onboarding staff, of the end of year process, so the classic HCM type dynamics that we're dealing with now with Workday, it's really important to be able to understand industry specific use cases and domain use cases within those industries. And so you'll see us continue to strengthen our industry specific hiring and industry specific practices, Phil, which will lead to some technology consultancy type plays as well, in life sciences, in banking, etc.
Yeah. It's fascinating. And, I personally seen a leveling of the playing field like I'd never expected in terms of some of the consultative players like your Deloitte's, Accenture's and co. And then you've got the more traditional outsourcers like your Infees that have Cog in that bracket, Wipro, HCL. There seems to be a leveling of the playing field of when we're seeing some of these big deals up for discussion right now on who can actually move up the value chain a little bit to the point where they can listen to the client and execute against that versus execution capability. And we're also seeing a desire from clients. We just need to move. We need to move fast. We don't necessarily need the very best. We need someone who's going to get us there, who we trust, and can actually do a job that's good enough. Not necessarily, has to be the all swinging and dancing solution. Are you seeing this leveling off where it's a lot more about just who's going to be a long-term partner who we can trust at this point than maybe the mindset of even a year ago where it was slightly different?
I think a few things are happening. Trust is essential, frankly, in life amongst individuals, amongst companies and vendors. It's no different. And credibility is what I would call a say-do ratio. But what I'm seeing, Phil, to be honest, in the COVID world, there certainly is vendor consolidation happening. I actually think there's a great deal of focus on efficiency as well. So nobody's going to do a data modernization program or a cloud program or an e-commerce program with somebody who's cheaper if you don't have confidence they'll do it well. So there are, I would call technology gates that you absolutely have to pass. But certainly I think we have a what I would view an amazing opportunity to distinguish ourselves. If you think about the classic, organization where people have tinkered and toyed with hybrid cloud or shift of workloads to public cloud, and they start almost up from the bottom at the infrastructure layer to the application and data layer. We're seeing also more and more people realizing actually you've got to start with business value. You've got to start with the experience. And if you start at the other end of the spectrum, you start talking about user experience, which starts thinking about then software product engineering. Now that user experience will be around hyper personalization. So the whole notion of the interactive experience, which is powered by intelligence, which of course sits on the data layer that you have. And is that data modernized? Is it workable? Is it leverageable? Which of course, in order for it to be done at scale, needs to sit on a cloud-based platform. That's where I think Cognizant, if you think, Phil, you'll appreciate this as a Brit, we don't have enough roundabouts in the US, of course. But as I think about a roundabout with multiple on-ramps, Cognizant can play very adeptly in this. People can come in at the bottom, cloud data, and migrate up. Or people who want to start with user experience can actually come in via soft vision or our interactive experience, which will ultimately drive data and cloud as well. And I think we're uniquely positioned in that regard, in the sense that we can play tops down or bottoms up. And so the potential for us is frankly enormous. I am actually seeing some, what I would call fatigue amongst clients. And I must admit, 18 months ago, I was quite fatigued after the first week of client meetings when, a lot of the meetings were, look, Brian, we love Cognizant. We've worked with you for 5-10 years. We do this, your build, run. By the way, we're going through some cost efficiencies. We need you to share the pain. So the good news, they love us. The bad news, we have to take some concessions. The good news then when I say, well, listen, can we consolidate vendors? Yeah, of course. We appreciate you more than others. You're strategic. So it's a bit of a zigzag. But in the meeting then, when we started talking about digital, in most cases, people didn't even know we had digital capabilities, anything close to what we have, whether that is a fault of our branding or our marketing or our client engagement teams who aren't compensated or trained or competent to have those discussions. I have my own suppositions. I prefer not to share them here, perhaps over a bottle of wine some night, Phil. But fundamentally now what I find ourselves in a position is we are getting more and more credibility to be a viable challenger in that arena. Our digital business is $5-6 billion. It's not as though we're a startup in this regard. We pulled a lot of our capabilities together, such as our digital engineering capabilities. We've acquired a lot of cloud-based capabilities. So we're actually now in a position, back to footballing terms, almost of a total football, Johan Cruyff type world, where it's not as though the attacker, the midfielder, or defender are unique roles. We think, we should be down selected in every down select because we can play as a defensive midfielder or an attacking midfielder in build or run, said another way, or indeed in the transformation project innovation type work. And that's what gets me excited about our potential and the portfolio that has been built over the years.
Excellent. This has been fantastic. A couple more less intense questions. So number one TV show and number one book to read during a pandemic.
Look, I'm not traveling as much these days, but I will say I'm about a decade behind. But I've recently watched Mad Men start to finish, and back to, which is probably a decade old, by the way, and back to how technology changes. You know, this was the offices where people were drinking, smoking, and there were typewriters on everybody's desk, and you know, people doing that work. And you think, well, technology has changed things, but we've had a massive expansion of work that's changed with that. So I like Mad Men, I like Fargo, both the movie as well as the TV series, Breaking Bad. You know, lots of enjoyment watching those. Books, listen, I'm a little bit of a classics guy. I like Steinbeck, Hemingway, Dickens, Thomas Hardy, to use some of the Brits. And all of this, of course, comes with a great deal of questions around love, the pursuit of the American dream, social classes, ambition, failed ambition. But I will say one of the best books I've read in the last year that I actually bought for all board members and management committee members was Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, which is extremely self-deprecating and an incredible book about an American icon and brand that, had you not read the book, you would have no idea of the genesis of this company and the brilliance of this man who led the company forward. It's a little bit back to the question you asked earlier about leadership, Phil, and the question around how do you attract people, or who do you bring in? I want to bring people in that are smarter than me. I mean, every single day I learn from my executive committee. We have some great conversations at our executive committee, and it stretches my mind in terms of what I should be thinking about as well. I think Shoe Dog and Phil Knight is a good example again of a leader who actually wanted to surround himself with people who would push the envelope.
Yeah, well, I think we still have our Donald Draper couch in the office. Yeah, ideal on a Friday afternoon after a long webcast. Great. One final question, and who's going to win the pandemic Premier League soccer this year?
Ooh. Your team have a bit of a chance this year, but I don't think they'll do it. Liverpool are struggling with defensive problems, so I'm worried that they might not do it either, subject to who they buy in December. So I'm of the opinion that Chelsea or Man City could potentially pip it, Liverpool potentially second or third, but I'd like to think they can still get there based on attack only. They may concede a lot of goals, but they might score more than they concede.
I have a feeling you'll still do it. We have a couple of Man City supporters. Actually, one of them is on this call, Andy, so sure you made him very happy. And he's from Manchester as well, so he's a real one. Good. Well, look, this has been fantastic. Really enjoyed the candid insights. We got a lot of nice comments from people as well who typed in. So we'll try and get to everybody in due course. And we do have something called an MVP, which is a market vision paper that we've written with Cognizant with a lot of HFS research in there that helps articulate your vision, but also what we see is going on in the industry. So that will be available, I believe, next week. I think it's already written up and everything, but we'll distribute a copy to everybody for some Thanksgiving reading after the turkeys and things like that have been drunk and eaten. So it's been wonderful having you, Brian. I know we have a lot of a US audience on the line as well, so I wish you all a very happy Thanksgiving next week. Hopefully it's come at a time where you can all take a deep breath and get some family time and things, because it's been a brutal year. But the good news is that we have 2 vaccines at 95% efficacy, and I come from a family of biotech and virology people, so they inform me that 95% is off the scale amazing. So at least there is an end to this if we can distribute these things right, and it is still several months away, but I think we can at least thank God and thank each other for seeing a way out of this and getting to some sort of normality in the future, and hopefully getting some good experiences this year. Because I mean, I got a lot of time with my son. My cats know who I am now, and things as well. So it's not, and getting off the road's been a healthy experience for me personally. And Brian, I know you probably had a similar experience yourself with some of these things. So
there will always be lots more to do. You know, we're spending a lot more time now around ESG and corporate social responsibility. We'll issue a pretty compelling report in the new year. We just brought in a heavy hitter from the outside. So in terms of my year ahead, it'll nonetheless stay as busy as ever. But I'm pumped as to where we are, Phil. And thanks for the opportunity to spend time with you. And I look forward to seeing you soon.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brian. Thank you all for taking the time to dial in, and we look forward to having many of you rejoin us again very soon. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.